I was 31 and still living with my mother in the same narrow house on Ledgelawn Avenue where I'd grown up. 6 years after Dad drowned near Egg Rock Light when his lobster boat went over in a squall that came up fast and mean, the two of us had settled into a rhythm that worked well enough. I spent summers on the waterfront doing dock maintenance and winters keeping vacation rentals from freezing, and Mom kept the house the way it had always been, with Dad's brass fog bell still hanging on the back porch beside his orange oilskins. Bar Harbor emptied out hard in February. The tourists left, the seasonal workers followed, and what remained were the families who'd been here long enough to know which roads into Acadia stayed passable in snow and which foghorns belonged to which lighthouses. I knew them all. I knew the sound Bass Harbor Head made when the wind came from the southwest, and I knew the back way to Jordan Pond that avoided the summer traffic jams on the Loop Road. Mom had her private superstitions. She never said Dad's name near running water. I'd noticed it years ago, but hadn't thought much of it until I started paying attention. She'd be washing dishes or filling the kettle, and if his name came up, she'd shut the faucet off first. Then she'd say it. Then she'd turn the water back on. I didn't ask her about it. The week before August 9th, Frenchman Bay started acting wrong. I noticed it first at low tide on a Wednesday afternoon when I was checking dock pilings near the town pier. The mudflats were clicking, not the usual sucking sound of water draining through stones, but sharp metallic ticks, like cooling metal, scattered across the exposed bottom in no pattern I could follow. I crouched at the edge and listened for a full minute, trying to figure out what was shifting down there, but the clicks never synced up. Thursday morning, 3 lobster buoys off Bald Porcupine Island drifted against the wind. I watched them from the breakwater while I ate lunch. The breeze was coming steady from the east, but the buoys moved west, trailing their lines behind them like they were being pulled. Friday evening, the foghorn at Bass Harbor Head sounded twice. The first blast was normal. The second came from under the water, deeper and slower, like an echo that had traveled up through the bay instead of across it. I didn't mention any of it to Mom. August 9th was a Friday. The fog came in heavy that afternoon and stayed thick through dinner. Mom and I were eating at the kitchen table when Nancy showed up around 6:30, letting herself in through the back door the way she always did. Nancy Alvarado had been my friend since we were kids, and she still lived 3 streets over in the house her parents had left her. "Roads are a nightmare," she said, dropping into the chair across from me. "Tourists everywhere. Half of them stopped in the middle of Cottage Street trying to figure out where they parked." Mom set another plate without asking. "You eaten?" "Not yet." We ate pot roast and potatoes while Nancy complained about the summer people and Mom asked after Nancy's sister, who'd moved to Portland 2 years back. It was ordinary. The kind of evening we'd had 100 times. Outside, the fog pressed against the windows, and the house settled into the familiar quiet of an August night when the bay was calm and the town was waiting for the weekend crowds to clear out. At 8:17, all 3 phones screamed. The sound wasn't a ringtone. It was a flat, mechanical shriek that came from my phone on the counter, Mom's phone on the table, and Nancy's phone in her pocket, all at the same instant. The wireless emergency alert screen filled every display, bright red text over black. Coastal acoustic emergency, move indoors immediately, gather household members. Seal all drains, faucets, toilets, and vents. Cover ears. Do not speak names. Do not answer voices. Maintain physical contact with a living person until all clear. Issued by National Weather Service and Hancock County Emergency Management. Nancy laughed. It came out wrong, too sharp. "What the hell is a coastal acoustic emergency?" I read it again. The words didn't make more sense the second time. Mom stood up. She didn't say anything. She just pushed her chair back and walked to the linen closet in the hallway. When she came back, she was carrying towels, duct tape, and the roll of heavy plastic she used for winterizing the windows. Her face was white. "Mom?" She didn't answer. She went straight to the kitchen sink, stuffed a dish towel into the drain, and started tearing strips of duct tape with her teeth. The phone screamed again. Same sound, same red screen, different message. If a known voice calls from water, do not respond. Issued by National Weather Service and Hancock County Emergency Management. Nancy picked up her phone. She stared at it. Calls from water? Mom taped over the drain. She used 6 strips, crisscrossed, pressing each one down hard enough that the plastic sink edge creaked. Then she moved to the bathroom. I looked at Nancy. She looked at me. From the bathroom came the sound of tape ripping, water shutting off, the toilet lid slamming down. "Should we—" Nancy started. "Help her," I said. We followed Mom through the house. She was already in the basement, crouched beside the floor drain with the plastic sheeting spread across her knees. I held the edges while she taped it down. Nancy sealed the bathtub upstairs. Nobody spoke. The alert had said not to speak names, but we weren't speaking at all, and I didn't know if that was better or worse. When we came back to the kitchen, the pipes in the walls were knocking. Not the usual hammer of trapped air. These were separated taps, deliberate and slow, like someone trying out a rhythm. 3 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. Pause. 4 knocks. They came from the wall behind the stove, then from under the floor, then from the ceiling near the hallway. Mom was standing in the middle of the kitchen with the duct tape in one hand and her other hand pressed flat over her mouth. Nancy grabbed my arm. "Caleb?" "Don't," I said. She stopped. The knocking stopped too. The 3 phones lay on the dinner table, screens still lit, showing the second alert in red letters that didn't blink or fade. If a known voice calls from water, do not respond. Mom went white before I finished reading. She didn't ask what it meant. She didn't wait for me to say anything. She just stood up from the table, walked to the linen closet in the hall, and came back with an armload of towels, a roll of duct tape, and the heavy plastic sheeting she used for winterizing the windows. Nancy watched her with a confused half smile, like maybe this was some kind of joke she hadn't caught up to yet. Mom dropped everything on the kitchen counter and went straight for the sink. She stuffed a dish towel into the drain, pushed it down hard with her fingers, tore off a length of tape with her teeth and pressed it flat over the towel, then another strip, then another, sealing the opening in an X. Her hands moved fast, too fast, like she'd done this before. "Cynthia," Nancy said, "what are you doing?" Mom didn't answer. She was already moving toward the bathroom. I stood there holding my phone, watching her disappear down the hall. The alert was still glowing on the screen. Seal all drains, faucets, toilets, and vents. I looked at Nancy. Nancy looked at me. Neither of us moved. Then all 3 phones on the table went dark at once. Not dead, just no signal. The little bars in the corner dropped to nothing, and the emergency alert vanished like someone had flipped a switch. I tapped the screen. Nothing. Nancy picked hers up, shook it like that would help. "Did yours just—" The pipes knocked. Not the usual groan of old plumbing, not the rattle of air in the lines. This was separated, deliberate. 3 taps, pause, 2 taps, pause, 1 long knock that rang through the wall like something hitting the copper from inside. Nancy set her phone down slowly. The knocking came again, different rhythm this time. Faster. It moved from the kitchen wall to the ceiling, then back down toward the floor, following the path of the pipes behind the drywall. It didn't sound like pressure, it sounded like syllables. I heard Mom in the bathroom, tape ripping, the toilet seat slamming, her footsteps quick and light on the tile. "Caleb," Nancy said quietly, I didn't answer. I was already walking toward the hall closet where Mom kept the sewing basket. My hands felt slow and stupid as I dug through the spools and needles, looking for the bag of cotton balls she used for cleaning Dad's guns. Found it, grabbed a handful, stuffed them into my ears, packing them in until the world went muffled and strange. Dad's shooting earmuffs were on the top shelf, still smelling faintly of gun oil and sweat. I pulled them down and fitted them over the cotton, the pressure sealed around my head. The knocking in the pipes didn't stop, but it changed. I could still feel it in my teeth, in my chest, but I couldn't hear the shape of it anymore. Mom came out of the bathroom with tape still stuck to her fingers. She looked at me, looked at the earmuffs, nodded once, hard, like I'd finally done something right. Nancy was still standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, watching us like we'd both lost our minds. I walked back into the living room and sat down on the floor, pressed my back against the couch. Mom followed. She sat beside me, close enough that our shoulders touched. I reached out and wrapped my left hand around her wrist. Her pulse hammered under my fingers. Nancy stood in the doorway. "This is insane," she said. I could barely hear her through the earmuffs, but I read her lips well enough. "You're acting like..." The toilet lid lifted in the bathroom, just a quarter inch. Then it settled back down with a soft click. Nancy's face changed. She walked into the living room slowly, like the floor might give out under her. Sat down on my other side. I took her hand. Her fingers were warm and dry. She squeezed once, then held on. Mom leaned forward and grabbed the grocery receipt off the coffee table. Found a pen in the couch cushions. Wrote in block letters across the back, "Do not let go even if I do." She underlined it twice. Nancy read it over my shoulder. She didn't laugh. She just nodded and squeezed my hand tighter. For a long time, nothing happened. We sat there on the floor in a line, holding on to each other, listening to the house breathe. The sealed drains bulged under the tape. I could see it from where I sat. The plastic over the kitchen sink bowing outward like something was pushing from underneath. The toilet lid lifted again, settled, lifted. The window started to fog. Not from the outside, from the inside. Condensation spread across the glass in slow, uneven patches, dripping down in thick trails that didn't look like water. They looked gray, almost black. The house was dry. We hadn't run the shower. We hadn't boiled anything. But the windows wept like we were sitting in a steam room. I felt the voices before I heard them. Through the floorboards, through the couch at my back, through the bones in my skull. They didn't come from one place. They came from the basement, the bathroom, the kitchen sink, the walls themselves. Layers of sound too low and too high to name, vibrating in the muffled dark of my covered ears. I couldn't make out words, just tones, inflections. The rise and fall of questions, commands, pleas. Some of them sounded like tourists asking for directions. Some of them sounded like kids from the town beach. Then one voice cut through every barrier. Not loud, just clear, perfectly shaped inside my head, like it had always been there and I was only now remembering how to hear it. "Caleb." Dad's voice. The way he used to say my name when I was small and he wanted me to look at something out on the water. Calm, patient, warm. I froze. Mom's hand tightened around my wrist. Her nails dug in, broke the skin. I felt blood, warm and slick, running down into my palm. Her mouth opened. "Caleb." Dad's voice came out of her throat. Her lips moved, but her face stayed slack, terrified. Her eyes were hers. Her mouth wasn't. "Don't answer anything that uses a name." The voice was steady, even. It sounded like Dad giving instructions on the boat, telling me where to step, where to hold on. But it was coming from Mom, and her jaw was working like someone else was pulling the strings. "Don't trust anyone wet." Her head tilted, just a little, just enough to look wrong. "Get to the basement shutoff before dawn if she starts asking for me." I wanted to pull away. I wanted to rip the earmuffs off and scream at her to stop. But the alert had said to maintain physical contact. The alert had said not to let go. "The water learned the shape of people," Dad's voice said through Mom's mouth, "but it needs names to climb all the way in." Her lips twisted into a smile. Not Dad's smile, not any smile I'd ever seen on a human face. It was too wide, too slow, like someone was learning how smiles worked by watching from the outside. Nancy's hand went cold in mine. Not cool, cold. Like I was holding something that had been pulled from a freezer. Her fingers didn't move, didn't squeeze. They just stayed locked around mine, stiff and dead weight heavy. I didn't look at her. I kept my eyes on Mom's face, on that smile that didn't belong to Dad or to anyone. On her eyes, still hers, still begging me not to let go. Nancy's cold hand stayed locked in mine, and the smile on Mom's face didn't move. Nancy leaned close and whispered clearly through my ear protection, using the nickname only Dad had ever called me. "Look at me. Just look at me." I refused to answer, refused to turn my head. Her hand crushed mine. Not squeezed, crushed. The bones ground together and I felt something crack in my ring finger. She tore the right earmuff off my head with her free hand, the elastic band snapping against my skull, and tried to force my face toward the living room radiator. There was a gap beneath it, an unsealed gap I had forgotten existed. Black water threaded up through the floor, not dripping, threading, like something was pulling it up one filament at a time. I twisted away. Nancy's grip tightened until my wrist went numb. Then black seawater poured from her nose and mouth. It didn't choke her, didn't make her cough. It just came out in a steady stream, running down her chin and soaking into her sweater, and she kept pulling me toward the radiator while her eyes stayed locked on mine. Mom threw herself onto Nancy's back. She didn't say anything, didn't scream words, just screamed, raw and animal, and grabbed Nancy's hair with both hands. Nancy stumbled sideways. Her grip loosened for half a second. I yanked free. My hand was slick with blood where her nails had broken the skin. I couldn't feel my fingers. I ran for the back porch, grabbed the only heavy thing by the door, Dad's brass bell, the one Mom kept beside his oilskins, and ran. I didn't look back, didn't stop at the door, just ran. Outside, Bar Harbor was wrong. Every house on Ledge Lawn had its lights on, every window full of faces, people standing behind glass, not moving, just mouthing names into the empty street. I saw Mr. Torrance in his living room, saw the Kellys' teenage daughter pressed against their front window with both palms flat on the glass, saw old Mrs. Pratt in her bathrobe, lips moving in the same rhythm as the girl 3 houses down. No one was outside. Fire trucks sat diagonally across Cottage Street with their lights flashing, red and white strobes cutting through the fog. No firefighters, no movement, just the trucks, abandoned mid-turn, doors open, radios crackling. I got into Mom's Subaru. The keys were still in the cup holder where she always left them. My hands shook so hard I dropped them twice before I got the engine started. The radio came on with the ignition, blasting static so loud I punched the power button and cracked the plastic face. I drove toward Route 3, past the village green doing 40 in a 25. The fountain was running, People knelt around it in a circle, tourists and locals mixed together, all of them with their heads bowed like they were praying or listening. Their mouths moved. I couldn't hear them through the closed windows, but I saw their lips shaping names in perfect unison. I ran the red light at Main Street. No one followed. No sirens. Just fog and lit windows and the sound of my own breathing too loud in the cab. Route 3 was empty until the bridge. At the Mount Desert Narrows Bridge near Thompson Island, the road ended in a wall of vehicles. Coast Guard trucks, state police cruisers, National Guard Humvees parked bumper to bumper across both lanes, portable floodlights on tripods, orange traffic cones in a zigzag line leading to a single gap barely wide enough for one car. I slowed, stopped. Uniformed figures stood in front of the barricade. 6 of them. Maybe 8. They wore hearing protection and face shields, the kind with full plastic visors that cover your whole face. But I could see their mouths moving behind the plastic. All of them. The same rhythm, the same words. Water dripped from their sleeves onto the dry pavement. One stepped in front of the Subaru. He held up a hand. Palm out. Stop. His mouth shaped 2 words behind the face shield. Cynthia Cunningham. Mom's full name, not mine, hers. I floored it. The Subaru lurched forward. The figure didn't move. I swerved right, clipped the line of traffic cones, sent them spinning into the dark. The half-closed gate was just aluminum and hinges. It folded under the bumper with a metal scream. I scraped the passenger side along a cruiser hard enough to rip the mirror off, kept going, tires shrieking, and crossed the bridge while figures ran after me in silence. Not shouting, not calling for backup, just running. I didn't look in the rear view until I hit Trenton. The road behind me was empty, fog rolling in off the water, no headlights, no pursuit. I made it to the Hampton Inn Ellsworth Bar Harbor just before midnight. Pulled into the parking lot, killed the engine, sat there with both hands locked on the wheel until my arms stopped shaking. Then I looked down. My shirt was soaked, my jeans were soaked, salt water. I could smell it, taste it in the back of my throat. But I hadn't been in the water, hadn't been near the water, hadn't touched anything wet except Nancy's hand. I got out of the car, stood in the parking lot with Dad's brass bell in one hand and salt water on my clothes from no visible source. I stayed in the second-floor room at the Hampton Inn Ellsworth Bar Harbor for 2 days, with the bathtub drain taped shut and the television on. The news called it a hazardous materials incident. They showed aerial footage of Mount Desert Island ringed by Coast Guard cutters and portable towers, the whole place wrapped in fog that did not move with the wind. They interviewed a FEMA spokesperson who said the situation was contained and residents were being sheltered in place. They did not say what the material was or why the entire island needed to be sealed. I called Mom every few hours. The phone rang until voicemail picked up. Her voice on the greeting sounded normal. I did not leave messages because I did not know what might be listening. I called Nancy. Voicemail. I tried again at midnight. Voicemail. I tried at dawn. Nothing. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and old carpet. I kept the curtains closed. I ate protein bars from the vending machine and drank bottled water because I did not trust the sink. Every time a pipe knocked in the wall, I stopped breathing until the sound passed. On the second night, I heard a voice in the hallway outside my door. It sounded like Mom asking if I was awake. I put my hands over my ears and counted to 300. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty. On the 3rd morning, I broke. I opened my laptop and posted in a private Mount Desert Island community group I had not checked in years. The post was short. Has anyone heard from family still on the island? I did not use names. I hit send and closed the laptop before I could delete it. 20 minutes later, a woman's voice said my name in the hallway. I grabbed the brass bell and opened the door. She stood 3 feet back, hands visible, no water on her clothes. She was maybe 40, with dark auburn hair cut to her jaw and tired eyes. She wore a field jacket with a NOAA lanyard clipped to the pocket. "Warren Cunningham," she said. I did not answer. "My name is Ruby Hamilton. I work for NOAA. I'm not here to arrest you." I started to close the door. "You left with your father's brass bell," she said. Your mother spoke in his voice. The second alert said, "If a known voice calls from water, do not respond." I stopped. "I didn't post that," I said. "I know." "Then how do you know it?" "Because I wrote the alert," she said, "and because you're not the only person who ran." She asked if we could talk somewhere public. I said I would meet her downstairs in 10 minutes. She nodded and walked back toward the elevator without looking at the room number. I taped the bell into a grocery bag, put on a clean shirt, and went down. Flexit Cafe and Bakery was 2 blocks from the hotel. It smelled like coffee and wood smoke. The tables were full of people who looked like they had driven from somewhere else and did not know where to go next. Ruby sat in the back corner with 2 cups already on the table. She pushed one toward me when I sat down. "I'm not here to arrest you," she said again. "You said that. I'm here to stop you from going back without understanding what happened." I wrapped both hands around the cup. It was too hot to drink. "You're Noah," I said. "You study fish." "I study ocean acoustics," she said. "Sound in water. How it moves, how it stays." "Sound doesn't stay." "It does," she said, "in the right conditions." She pulled a folded map from her jacket and spread it on the table. It showed the Gulf of Maine with depth contours and temperature gradients marked in blue and red. There were circles drawn around 5 coastal towns. Bar Harbor was one of them. "NOAA and the Navy have known since the Cold War that parts of this Gulf hold sound in ways that should be impossible," she said. "We used SOSUS hydrophone arrays to track Soviet submarines. We found voices instead." I looked at the map. The circles were small and precise. "What kind of voices?" "Human," she said. "Distress calls, radio transmissions, names spoken over water during fear or grief or death. In certain cold, dense layers, those voices don't dissipate. They persist as pressure patterns." "That's not possible." "It wasn't supposed to be," she said. "But the recordings don't lie. We call it the call layer because it indexes voices by proper names. It's not an afterlife. It's not a haunting. It's a living acoustic storage system in the ocean. When it's energized by specific tides and low-frequency transmissions, it can replay those voices, combine them, direct them." She tapped the map. "The things inside it are called callers." I set the cup down. "My father is not a thing." "Your father drowned 6 years ago," she said. Her voice was flat. "What spoke through your mother was not him. It was an acoustic imprint shaped by his last transmission. The callers have no bodies. If a living person hears and answers a known voice, or speaks a proper name while the call layer is active, the caller can enter through the auditory and speech centers. It takes the mouth first, then the body." I thought about Mom's face, the way her lips moved when Dad's voice came out. "The alert," I said. "Sealed drains, dry rooms, hearing protection, silence, physical contact," she said. "Those rules reduce exposure because plumbing and standing water act as speakers. The callers need an acoustic path. Water is the best conductor, but fog works. So does wet pavement. So does a voice traveling through a wall." She pulled out a second map. This one showed Mount Desert Island with red dots clustered near the shore. "NOAA installed experimental acoustic dampening nodes in 5 communities with unusual call layer activity," she said. "Bar Harbor, Gloucester, Newport, Cape May, Astoria. The nodes were supposed to activate together during an extreme tide. The combined signal would cancel the rising layer across multiple regions. Supposed to, I said. A software lockout left Bar Harbor running alone, she said. The isolated signal fed the layer instead of suppressing it. Years of stored voices came up through fog, drains, radios, municipal water systems. Your father's final distress call was one of the strongest local imprints because he drowned with his VHF mic open. He was calling for your mother and you without knowing the channel was still transmitting. The cafe was warm, but my hands were cold. Was it him? I said. She looked at me for a long time. I cannot tell you whether it was your father as a person or a protective pattern made from his last intentions, she said. I can tell you it probably saved you. I picked up the cup. The coffee tasted like metal. You trapped the whole town, I said. Everyone's still on that island. You're keeping them there to protect the mainland. She did not look away. If even one strong caller crosses the bridge inside a speaking host, she said, every coastal water system in New England can become an address. She stood. She left cash on the table for both coffees. She wrote something on a napkin and slid it toward me. Don't go back blind, she said. If you go back blind, you will not come back as yourself. She walked out. I sat there with the brass bell between my hands and the napkin in front of me. She had written one word. Address. I bought what I needed that evening at Rennis and Hannaford. Industrial earmuffs, foam earplugs, duct tape, bolt cutters, waterproof bags, a crowbar, grease pencils, 6 jugs of bottled water. The cashier at Rennis didn't ask questions. The one at Hannaford looked at the bolt cutters for a second too long, but scanned them anyway. I was loading the Subaru when the lights went out. First the parking lot, then the strip across Route 1, then Ellsworth itself, block by block, like someone was pulling switches in order. The darkness rolled east toward Trenton. I stood beside the open trunk and watched it go. Then I looked back toward Bar Harbor. A pale blue line pulsed above Mount Desert Island. Not light from the town. Light from dozens of temporary towers placed along the shore, on hills near the bridge. Generator rigs. The hum I'd felt in my chest at the cafe was visible now, a thin electric glow threading the fog. Ruby had said containment required enormous power. The blackout proved it. The system around Bar Harbor wasn't just a roadblock. It was a powered cage, and it was pulling from the regional grid. I got in the Subaru and drove. The road to Thompson Island was closed at the Acadia Gateway Center. No cruisers, no uniforms, just sawhorses and reflective tape across both lanes. I parked behind a darkened business, grabbed the brass bell from the passenger seat and wrapped it in a towel so it wouldn't ring while I walked. The air smelled like salt and diesel and something sharper. Ozone, maybe. Or fear. I cut into the woods. The containment perimeter was visible from the tree line, portable towers on trailers, Coast Guard cutters in the Narrows, floodlights aimed into fog, thick black cables running from generators into speaker arrays that hummed below hearing. The air over Mount Desert Island shimmered, the vibration pressed against my ribs the way it had at the cafe, but stronger, heavier, like the sound had weight. From inside the sealed zone came a roar. Not random, not screaming, names, mothers calling children, husbands calling wives, dispatchers calling boat numbers, dead people calling the living from sinks and coves and wet pavement. The voices braided together, layered, overlapping in every emotional register at once. Laughter, rage, pleading, mourning. It sounded like one huge mouth practicing the town. I waited in the trees until 3 a.m. The tide dropped. The fog thickened. The floodlight stayed fixed on the bridge approach, but the edges of the perimeter went gray. I crawled beneath a section of fencing near the bridge, slid down the rocks on my stomach, and crossed under the Mount Desert Narrows Bridge outside the main cone of light. My hands shook. My breath came short. I kept the towel tight around the bell. The moment I passed into the containment field, the pressure in my chest vanished. The hum no longer pushed from outside. It surrounded me evenly, like I'd stepped into water. The towers weren't keeping the sound away from me. They were holding it against the island, pressing it down. The rules had changed. Inside the field, the voices weren't trying to get in from beyond the perimeter. They were already everywhere. Waiting for a mouth, I reached Hull's Cove Visitor Center just before dawn. FEMA tents, no AA equipment cases. 3 clear modular quarantine cells set up in the parking lot. The cells were maybe 10 feet square, plexiglass on all sides, sealed doors with rubber gaskets. Portable, temporary, wrong. The first cell held about 15 people. They sat in restraints and hearing hoods, filthy, soaked, dehydrated. Some moved normally. Some jerked like their muscles didn't belong to them. One woman rocked back and forth with her mouth taped shut. A man in a torn flannel shirt stared at the ceiling and mouthed words I couldn't hear. Another slumped against the wall with his eyes closed, breathing hard. Then I saw Ryder Patterson. He'd gone to Mount Desert Island High School with me. Played lacrosse. Worked whale watch tours out of the harbor after graduation. He was thinner now, wiry, with sandy brown hair matted to his skull and a split across his forehead that hadn't been cleaned. His throat was swollen purple. His hands were zip-tied in front of him. He saw me. He slammed both hands against the plexiglass. His mouth opened. No sound came out, but I saw the shape of it. Full names, classmates, teachers, dead relatives. He mouthed them with frantic precision, one after another, like he was reading from a list only he could see. His lips moved fast, too fast. His eyes stayed locked on mine. A medic stepped into the outer tent. Tall, black, scrubs under a response jacket, gloves, face shield, heavy hearing protection. His name tag said Jones, Richard Jones. He didn't look at the cell. He checked a clipboard, wrote something down, turned toward the equipment table. Ryder threw himself at the glass. His forehead hit hard enough to split the wound wider. Blood ran into his eyes. He didn't stop. He slammed his hands again, trying to make Richard Jones look at his mouth. The medic turned, saw him, froze. For a second, Richard Jones's eyes dropped to Ryder's moving lips. Then he looked away. Fast, deliberate. He stepped back from the cell, put the clipboard down, and walked out of the tent without looking back. Ryder slid down the plexiglass. His mouth kept moving. I backed away from the first cell. My chest hurt. My hands were numb. I made it to the second cell before I had to stop. One woman sat inside. Curly, graying brown hair, fleece pullover soaked through, restraint hood hanging loose around her neck like she'd pulled it off herself. She knelt near the plexiglass with one hand pressed flat against the fogged surface. In the condensation, she'd written 2 words. Help us. She looked at me. Her eyes were clear, awake, terrified. Then she lifted her other hand and dragged it across the glass, smearing the letters. She wrote again, slower this time, pressing hard enough to leave tracks in the fog. Don't open. Her hand stayed pressed beside the crossed-out words and the fresh warning. I waited until the medic turned toward the second quarantine cell, then slid a folded No AA field map off the equipment table and shoved it into my jacket. The paper crackled too loud. No one looked. They were all watching Angela write her warning on the plexiglass. I walked fast toward the tree line and didn't stop until the parking lot disappeared behind me. The map showed Bar Harbor in overlapping colored zones. Red meant active acoustic contamination. Yellow meant intermittent signal. Blue meant containment towers. The streets I knew by heart had become a grid of threats marked in federal shorthand. I traced a route that stayed off Main Street and away from the harbor, following residential blocks where the map showed no standing water symbols. Ledgelawn Avenue was marked yellow. I kept my earmuffs tight and my mouth shut. The streets were empty except for voices. They came from storm drains, from open windows, from parked cars with their doors hanging wide. Some sounded like tourists asking for directions. Some sounded like kids from the town beach. I didn't look toward the houses where I heard them calling from upstairs bathrooms. The sun was coming up gray over the bay when I reached my street. Our front door was open. I stopped at the edge of the yard. The house looked wrong, even from the driveway. The porch light was off. The mailbox hung crooked. Dad's old oilskins were gone from the hook by the back door. I crossed the lawn and stepped inside. The living room furniture had been shoved against the walls like someone needed space in the center of the floor. Every family photograph lay face down on the mantel, the side tables, the bookshelf. I picked one up. The glass was fogged from the inside, even though the frame was dry. In the kitchen, the faucet ran a thin stream of black water into the sink. The plastic Mom had taped over the drain was torn and hanging loose. Water pooled on the counter and dripped onto the floor in a slow, steady rhythm that sounded like footsteps. Mom sat at the table. She had Coast Guard zip ties around one wrist, the kind they use on boats when regular cuffs won't hold in wet conditions. The other end was looped through the chair back. Dad's old VHF radio sat in front of her. The radio hadn't worked in 6 years. The mic cord was wrapped twice around her free hand. Nancy stood behind her. Nancy was barefoot. Her jeans were soaked from the knees down, dark and dripping onto the linoleum. She smiled at me. Her mouth moved a fraction too late for the words I felt, pressing into my teeth through the earmuffs. I didn't take the earmuffs off. Nancy's lips kept moving. I felt the shape of my name trying to push through the foam and cotton, trying to find my mouth and make me answer. Then she spoke, and I heard it clearly even through the protection. "Warren." It was Mom's voice, but Nancy's mouth was the one that moved. "Warren, sweetheart. Say one name. Just one. Say one name and we can all come home." Mom's eyes were open, but she wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the radio. Nancy leaned closer. Her smile widened. When she spoke again, it was Dad's voice, rough and tired, the way he sounded after a long haul. "Boy, don't make me ask twice. Shut the water off and say your name so I know you're listening." I unwrapped the bell. Dad's brass fog bell, the one he used to ring on the boat when the electronic horn failed. I'd carried it all the way from Ellsworth wrapped in a towel because Ruby told me nonverbal broadband noise could break a caller's address for seconds. It disrupted the shape of speech without creating a name. I rang it once. Nancy staggered. Her smile cracked. Mom's eyes focused and found mine across the kitchen. I rang it again. The VHF radio's speaker burst into static, then into Dad's voice, raw and terrified, the way it must have sounded the night he drowned with the mic still open. "Mayday, Mayday. This is the Cynthia May, taking water off Egg Rock. I'm Cynthia, if you hear this, I'm trying. Warren, don't answer. Don't." The voice cut into the warning I'd heard through Mom's mouth 3 nights ago. "Shut the water off!" Nancy lunged. I hit the bell again hard, right beside her ear. For 1 second, her real face came back. Exhausted, aware, terrified. She shoved me toward the basement door instead of grabbing me. Black water poured from her mouth. Not a trickle, a flood. It ran down her chin, soaked her shirt, pooled at her feet. I stumbled backward. My hand found the basement doorknob. Nancy slammed the door shut between us from the kitchen side. The lock clicked. I stood on the top step in the dark, listening to her scream names in voices that weren't hers. Voices I knew. Voices I'd heard at the grocery store, at the post office, at the harbor. All of them calling for me through Nancy's throat. Mom's footsteps dragged across the floor above me. The chair scraped. The zip tie rattled against the table leg. I went down the stairs. The basement smelled like salt and rust. Water pulsed up through the floor drain hard enough to lift the duct tape Mom had sealed it with. The tape bulged, split, and black water spread across the concrete in thin fingers. The main shutoff valve was in the corner behind Dad's old workbench. The handle was rusted solid. I grabbed the crowbar I'd brought from Ellsworth and wedged it under the valve stem. Above me, Nancy shrieked names. Mom's name. My name. Dad's name. Names of people I'd gone to school with. Names of tourists I'd never met. I pulled. The handle broke free with a scream of metal on metal. I turned it with both hands. The pipe shuddered. The water through the house died. The voices didn't stop, but they got quieter, drier, like they were coming from farther away. Footsteps on the stairs. Mom crawled down, dragging the chair still zip-tied to her wrist. She had a grease pencil in her free hand, the kind she used to label freezer bags. She didn't look at me. She wrote on the concrete wall in big, shaking letters. I answered him. Under it, she wrote, "Don't say me." I understood. Dad wasn't waiting whole beneath the bay. Mom hadn't escaped untouched, but she was still present enough to refuse the thing wearing her grief. I put the earmuffs on her. She pointed to the duct tape on the workbench and nodded. I tore off a strip and pressed it gently over her mouth. She closed her eyes. Upstairs, the pipes hammered with trapped voices. I led Mom toward the back door. She moved slow, the chair scraping behind her on the floor. I didn't try to cut the zip tie. We didn't have time. Nancy stood in the upstairs bathroom window when I looked back from the yard. One hand pressed to the glass. Her mouth moved, forming words I couldn't hear. An apology, maybe, or another name. No AA floodlights swept across the house. I pulled Mom into the trees and didn't look back again. The basement door slammed shut above me while black water spread under it from the kitchen side. The floor drain bulged. The tape I'd pressed over it lifted an inch, and black water pulsed through the gap like a fist trying to shove itself up from below. The basement smelled like rust and salt, and something older, something that had been waiting under the foundation long before we'd lived here. I wedged the crowbar under the shutoff handle. The pipe was 40 years old, and the valve had seized sometime after Dad stopped checking it. I leaned my weight onto the bar. The handle groaned. Above me, the dry pipes knocked in the walls, syllables hammering through copper and iron in rhythms that almost made sense. Nancy screamed. Not her voice, not one voice. She screamed names through the kitchen ceiling, my name, Mom's name, the names of people I'd gone to school with, people I'd seen at the harbor, people who'd drowned years ago. The voices layered over each other like a radio stuck between stations, all of them calling, all of them certain I would answer if they just found the right combination. The crowbar slipped. My hands were slick with sweat that smelled like seawater even though I hadn't touched any. I reset the bar, braced my boot against the foundation wall, and pulled. The handle broke free with a crack that felt like a bone snapping. I turned the shutoff. It fought me. The threads screamed metal against metal, and the pipe above my head shuddered hard enough to drop flakes of old paint from the ceiling joists. I kept turning. 2 full rotations. 3. The water flow through the drain choked down to a trickle, then a drip, then nothing. The house went silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence that meant every voice that had been riding the water through the pipes was now trapped inside them, pressing against the walls, looking for another way up. Then Nancy screamed again, but this time it was just her voice, raw and breaking, and she was screaming my full name over and over like she was trying to climb out of her own mouth. Footsteps on the basement stairs. I turned. Mom was crawling down toward me, dragging the kitchen chair still zip-tied to her wrist. She'd torn the plastic off one hand, and she was holding Dad's grease pencil, the thick black one he used to mark traps. Her face was gray, her eyes were focused. She reached the bottom step and held the pencil out to me. I took it. She pointed at the concrete wall beside the water heater. Her hand shook, but the gesture was deliberate. I stepped closer. She reached past me and pressed her palm flat against the wall, steadying herself. Then she took the pencil back and wrote in letters 2 inches tall. I answered him. She stopped. Her shoulders hitched once like she was swallowing something that wanted to come up. Then she wrote under the first line, "Don't say me." I stared at the words. Dad wasn't whole. He wasn't waiting under the bay the way I'd let myself imagine when his voice came through Mom's mouth. He was a shape made of sound, a pattern that remembered how to warn me because that was the last thing he'd been doing when the water took him. And Mom had answered him. She'd let him in because she missed him, and now part of what had him was inside her too. But she was still here, still enough of herself to write a warning. Still enough to know that hearing her name might pull the rest of her under. I grabbed the earmuffs I'd brought for her and fitted them over her ears. She didn't resist. When I held up the duct tape, she nodded. I tore off a strip and pressed it over her mouth. Her eyes stayed on mine the whole time. She wasn't asking me to save her. She was asking me not to let her speak. The pipes hammered again. No water in them now. Just trapped voices beating against the iron from the inside. I pulled the chair free from her wrist, snapped the zip tie with the crowbar, and hauled her toward the back door. She stumbled once on the basement stairs, and I caught her by the elbow. We didn't stop. The kitchen was dark, and I didn't look toward the table where Nancy had been standing. We went out through the back door into the yard. The grass was wet even though it hadn't rained. The air tasted like fog and copper. Behind us, the house groaned, all its dry pipes singing with pressure that had nowhere left to go. I looked back. Nancy was in the upstairs bathroom window. She stood with one hand pressed flat against the glass, her mouth moving. No sound came through. She was mouthing something I couldn't hear, and I didn't try to read her lips because I knew what it was. An apology. For a second, her face was just Nancy's face, exhausted, aware. Then the no AA floodlight swept across the house from the perimeter, white and sharp, and I turned away and pulled Mom toward the woods. We walked without speaking. I kept one hand locked around her wrist. She didn't resist. The earmuffs made her look smaller, like a kid wearing her father's work gear. The duct tape across her mouth was silver in the floodlights. The sun was rising gray over Frenchman Bay when we reached the Hull's Cove perimeter. The speaker towers hummed low enough to feel in my ribs. I could see the maintenance opening between 2 trailers, the gap I'd used to get in. I didn't know if it would still be open. I didn't know if anyone would be waiting on the other side. I rang Dad's bell. Once, twice. The sound cut through the hum like a knife through cloth. A figure stepped out from behind the left trailer. Ruby. She was wearing the same field jacket, same tired face, same expression that said she'd been expecting me to do something stupid, and here I was, proving her right. She walked toward us without hesitation. Her boots crunched on gravel. When she got close enough, she looked at Mom, at the earmuffs and the tape, at the way I was holding her wrist like I thought she might drift away if I let go. Ruby didn't ask if Mom was safe. She looked at me and said, "Getting her off the island means lying to 3 agencies, and it will not save anyone left behind." I didn't let go of Mom's wrist. Ruby held my stare for another 3 seconds. Then she turned and walked back toward the trailers. She came back with a stretcher and a blanket, and behind her, parked in the shadow of the left speaker tower, was an ambulance. Not a regular one. The back doors were propped open, and the interior was lined with gray acoustic foam, the kind that swallowed sound completely. Ruby helped me get Mom onto the stretcher. Mom didn't fight. She lay back and closed her eyes, and I pulled the blanket up to her shoulders. Ruby looked at me. "You coming?" I nodded. She wheeled the stretcher toward the ambulance. I followed. The foam-lined interior smelled like nothing. No salt, no rust, no voices, just the flat, dead quiet of a space designed to keep sound from getting in or out. Ruby locked the stretcher into place. I climbed in and sat on the bench across from Mom. She opened her eyes and looked at me. I couldn't see her mouth behind the tape, but I saw her shoulders relax, just slightly, like she'd been holding her breath since the kitchen and was finally letting it out. Ruby stepped back. She put one hand on the ambulance door and looked at me one more time. "Don't say her name," she said. "Not until someone tells you it's safe." I nodded. The doors closed. The ambulance doors opened onto gray morning light and the smell of wet pavement. I climbed down first, then turned back to help Mom, but 2 medics in hearing protection and face shields were already lifting her by the elbows. She didn't resist. Her taped mouth made her face strange, like someone I'd seen once but couldn't place. The brass bell was still in my left hand. I held it against my chest while they walked her toward the emergency entrance of Northern Light Main Coast Hospital. Ruby appeared beside me without warning. She looked worse than she had at the perimeter, her field jacket streaked with salt stains, her eyes red-rimmed, her jaw tight. She put one hand on my shoulder and squeezed once. "They'll take her to isolation," she said. "4th floor. No plumbing, no mirrors. You won't be able to go in." I nodded because I couldn't trust my voice yet. "I filed the transport authorization under my own clearance," Ruby continued. Her tone was flat, like she was reading from a form. "It won't hold up past tomorrow. After that, I'm probably done." "Thank you," I managed. She shook her head. "Don't. You got 1 person out. The rest are still in there." I knew that. Nancy was still in there. Ryder was still in there. Angela and the others in those plexiglass cells were still in there. Bar Harbor was still sealed behind the towers, and I had walked out through a maintenance gap with my mother's wrist in my hand while the voices hammered the pipes behind us. Ruby turned and walked toward a dark sedan parked near the ambulance bay. She didn't look back. I watched her drive away, and then I went inside. The isolation room had no sink, no mirror, no drain, and a whiteboard bolted to the wall beside the door. The glass was thick enough that I couldn't hear anything from the other side even when I pressed my ear to it. Mom sat on a narrow bed with her hands folded in her lap. The zip tie was gone, but red marks circled her wrist where it had been. A nurse had removed the tape from her mouth, but Mom hadn't tried to speak. She just stared at the whiteboard like she was reading instructions only she could see. They told me I could visit as long as I stayed outside the glass. They told me I was not allowed to say her name in her presence. They told me the room would stay dry and silent until they were sure she wasn't carrying anything that could climb into the hospital's water system. I sat in a plastic chair in the hallway with the bell in my lap and my hands where she could see them. I came back the next day, and the day after that. The tower lights over Mount Desert Island were visible from the hospital parking lot at night, pale blue pulses that lit the fog like a second dawn. The news called it a hazardous materials incident. The radio said the bridge was closed indefinitely. Online, people from Trenton and Ellsworth posted blurred photos of the speaker arrays and asked questions that nobody with clearance would answer. I didn't post anything. I sat in the chair outside Mom's room and watched her through the glass. She was stronger on the third day. She stood and walked to the window, then back to the bed. On the fourth day, she picked up the dry erase marker bolted to the whiteboard's frame and held it for a long time without writing. On the fifth day, she wrote, "water," and pointed to her throat. I nodded and stood so the nurse at the station could see me. They brought her a sealed bottle. On the sixth day, she wrote "safe" and pointed at me. I nodded. She erased it and wrote, "You safe?" I nodded again, even though I wasn't sure what safe meant anymore. She stared at the blank board for a while, then erased the question and sat back down. On the seventh morning, I got to the hospital early. The sun was just clearing the pines beyond the parking lot, and the hallway was quiet except for the hum of the air system. I sat in the chair with the bell in my lap and waited for Mom to wake up. She opened her eyes slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she turned her head toward the glass and saw me. She stood, walked to the whiteboard, picked up the marker. I thought she might write his name. I thought she might write her own. I thought she might ask me to say something that would let her speak again, even though I knew I couldn't. Instead, she wrote one word in tall, careful letters: "Son." Then she pressed her hand flat against the glass beneath it. I stood. The bell slid off my lap and hit the floor with a low, ringing note that made the nurse look up from her station. I didn't pick it up. I walked to the glass and put my hand where hers waited on the other side. Her palm was warm through the barrier. Mine was cold. We stayed like that while the sun climbed higher and the hallway filled with footsteps and voices that had nothing to do with the bay. The word above our hands didn't shimmer or fade. It just sat there on the whiteboard, plain and true, the only name I could carry without giving the water another address to use. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't have to. She knew.